I'm excited to have you join me for what is probably one of your last sessions of the day. This is right brain storytelling for left brain thinkers. And in our short time together, I'm hoping to share a few techniques to help you use real life scenarios and examples to create that kind of personal and relatable narrative that'll resonate with audiences. We're going to do a quick self-assessment that helps you identify your core storytelling strengths. I promise you have some. And we're going to create some space to practice a few skills that'll help you up level your storytelling game and moving forward. So take a look at this here. And what we are hoping for you to do is to just take a moment and look at these three prompts on the right and pick one. Or if you want to go off script and think of another story, something personal, another situation that you've thought of, that's also great too. And what I'm going to do is to give you 2 minutes to write down a few notes. Maybe you could go on mute and be speaking to yourself. You could sort of plot out what you might say if this was something where somebody asked you to do one of these prompts in a short time frame. So here, again, we're looking at telling a brief story about a time when you had to work with a community, maybe to implement flood mitigation measures, what that challenge was that you faced or how you overcame it. Another option is to share a brief story about a time you saw the impact of a natural disaster on a community, or maybe even experienced it yourself. Thinking about what lessons you learned, what that experience was like. And then the third prompt as an option we have is to imagine you're explaining the concept of resilience to someone who might not be familiar with the term. So how might you tell or share a brief story that illustrates the importance of building resilience in communities? So I'm going to go on mute for, I think, just give you another minute and a half and a few moments to think and collect yourself. And I will meet you back here in about a minute. Take care. All right. Well, hopefully now you've had a chance to take down a few notes. And I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat for others to see, how did that feel? I don't know about you, but when I'm asked to do these sort of extemporaneous sort of things on the spot, my heart rate definitely goes up, maybe you sweat a little, just thinking about that. So, you can take a moment here to look at this meditation garden and get back to center, and we can continue our exploration into stories. So we know that storytelling has been a part of human culture for thousands of years. It's a powerful tool for persuasion and communication, and for a lot of really great reasons. So just indulge me for a moment, a quick little bit of neuroscience here, but our brains are actually wired to respond to stories in a lot of unique ways. And this makes stories a really effective way to engage audiences and actually influence their behavior. We know storytelling activates more areas of the brain than just sharing data alone. So it makes it a really effective mechanism for capturing and holding attention. And when we think about the brain's response, we are listening to stories, when that's happening, multiple areas of our brain are firing and are activated. The visual cortex, sensory, motor cortex, and these are the areas of the brain responsible for processing sensory information, generating those emotions, and making decisions. So the brain is also releasing oxytocin when we hear stories, especially those that resonate really deeply with us. And that hormone is associated with trust and bonding and empathy. And these responses all together create a deeper connection between the storyteller and the audience. And this is what makes it possible to persuade and motivate people to take action. So the idea that storytelling is such an important piece for persuading people to act on the information we're sharing, I don't know about you, but sometimes that can be hard for me as a data file, when there's a lot of information I want to relay, especially to non-technical audiences. We might be in industries or areas where there's a lot of technical jargon or language, and we're trying to maybe seek out ways to communicate that in more plain language, maybe through a story. For me, especially in the early stages of my career, improvisation was a challenge. And we don't always have opportunities to practice our storytelling techniques unless we're being proactive about creating those opportunities for ourselves. So I share this slide and this picture in particular as a reminder that when we know these traits or characteristics about ourselves and the different environments we're in, we can use caution and see if there are additional tools we can add to our tool belt to help better connect and engage audiences. And storytelling is such a powerful way to do this, and why we're all here together today. So there are just a few ways we might seek to use stories and a few of the channels we might focus on. And I know today's session is predominantly, focused on how you might use them in more in-person activities like meetings and events. Don't forget, as a part of that storytelling as a technique is also a useful tool in materials and resources as well, whether you're using authentic images with captions, you could be using quotes or case studies or even audio and video to share the different experiences you have. So you can see a couple of examples there on the left. We might be using stories to help explain complex scientific or technical concepts. We might be showing the human impact of hazards. Maybe it is a way to highlight some of the benefits of action or to share some of the success stories from communities that others might choose to emulate. So there are a lot of different ways we can be thinking about them to inspire action. And so I had to share one of my favorite quotes, this one from Robin Moore that says, "Inside each of us is a natural born storyteller waiting to be released." And I really do believe that. We all have storytelling strengths. I promise, seriously, we do. And so we're going to walk through a couple of different skills that successful storytellers have. And, maybe even just quickly in the chat for those of you online, what are some of those characteristics that, when you hear and see a great storyteller, what are they doing? Or, what are the aspects or elements of that story that really compels and gets you excited? I'll give you a second for that. Please continue to share there. And so what I've created here is a synopsis slide of some of the storytelling skills I want to briefly cover today. I split them into 3 areas around content, delivery, and connection. And you'll also see a little word in parentheses that I'm hoping will be a way to help make these easier to remember. So with that, content, that's FOMO, fear of missing out, because you don't want people to miss out on all the great information you're hopefully going to be sharing with them as a part of your engagement. So this is where you're focused, organized, memorable, and original in what and how you share a story. So with delivery, I thought that might be kind of useful as CPR, because this is how you're going to bring life to your presentations and materials. This is where you're being, clear and positive and relaxed in how you present. And the final one is ESP, all about connection, all about, how you engage with the hearts and mind of your audience by being, self-confident, engaging, passionate, and as I walk through each of these slides going into content, FOMO, delivery, CPR, and connection, ESP, I want you to do a quick self-assessment on any of these areas where you feel particularly strong or confident. And you might also tag a couple of areas that maybe you want to work more on in the future. So, get out that pen and paper and, jot these down as we quickly walk through a few of these skills. All right. So with focused, this is all about using clear and simple messages, being straight to the point, using plain language can often be a part of this. Organized is about how we're approaching opportunities in a structured and controlled way, the sort of preparation we might do ahead of time. Being memorable is where we're using techniques like sounds and smells and visuals and interactivity, really take audiences on a journey with us. And then the originality component here is about, the opportunity to create metaphors or analogies or sort of other ways to creatively explain information. For delivery, our CPR, how we bring it to life, what are those, how are we being clear about and using our body movements, our gestures, our postures, our facial expressions? Is there a way we can convey positivity, and uplifting things through having a varied tone, inflection, volume, pacing, pauses? These are all tools we can use. And then, this is one I really, have close to my heart here. What sort of positive self-talk can we use? Not the stinking thinking, but how do we, tell ourselves we're going to do a great job and do the preparation that helps us to feel confident and relaxed when we're doing that. And then the last one really, again, is about that ESP, about building that connection. So what are the techniques we can use to listen and energize and engage audiences, along the way? I love to use humor here. That can be really helpful. Us being self-confident, how do we use that authentic and relatable language, and share of our experiences? Maybe there's a little bit of vulnerability there too. And then, what are the ways we can show our passion? Being present, sharing that vulnerability, connecting to some of the bigger themes, and there are a few tools to consider as we do this. We mentioned a couple, but I just wanted to do a quick deeper dive into a few of these as we're thinking about our own storytelling. So we're going to dive a little bit into using powerful metaphors, how to share data visually, embracing emotion, and then practice and refining, which is often the one that gets left behind. So analogies and metaphors activate the same brain regions as the actual experience is being described, which I think is really great and really compelling because you can transport people to those experiences and places. They also can make complex concepts more familiar, more memorable, and help to, make them more accessible and relatable as well. So by comparing unfamiliar concepts to something the audience is familiar with, left brain communicators can create that more accessible and memorable message. So here were a few quick ideas, just thinking about some metaphors. Could we compare building resilience, to building a muscle? Is there an opportunity where we talk about mitigation as like a seatbelt? Just as seatbelts reduce the risk of injury in a car accident, mitigation measures such as building codes and hazard mitigation plans reduce that risk of damage and loss in natural disasters. And, given the popularity of Queen's Gambit and other things, I even like this one, right? So natural hazards are like a game of chess. So just as in chess, natural hazards require strategic thinking and planning to avoid or minimize their impacts. So you guys might have some other great examples. If there's any powerful metaphors you have from your own experiences, would love to have you share those in the chat with the other folks on this call. We also know that visuals are a powerful storytelling tool and can help to convey complex information in a lot of different ways. Have some examples here of infographics, charts, and diagrams. We've got videos and animations. You could even think about interactive tools like quizzes or polls or games that help to engage and test knowledge in different ways. So this idea of adding strategic visuals to data-driven presentations can really be helpful and powerful in improving understanding. And the other thing, if you ever get a chance to actually test these with a couple of your audiences or folks that you might be bringing something to, that can also be a great way to make sure you're meeting the mark with your different audiences. For embracing emotion, personal anecdotes can definitely be powerful for providing context and humanizing, some of our data-driven messages. It also helps us to establish credibility and sort of build that trust and rapport with audiences. And then this is also an opportunity where, this isn't storytelling and not sharing, facts and logic and other things. It's really, what is the clever and useful combination of those two things when you're conveying a story? So I have here just a quick example from Cloud Tweaks about using humor and examples. I like to throw in there what emotional treasures, so not triggers, but thinking of treasures in a positive way, for connecting with audiences. And then we also, would be remiss if we didn't share this idea of practicing and refining. Storytelling is a skill. It takes time and effort and opportunities to actually refine and improve and think about the ways that we can do that where it's authentic and natural for each of us. So I like to encourage folks to experiment with different storytelling techniques. Not all of the techniques we talk through are going to be relevant or easy for you. Sort of, focus on a couple, pick your favorite, and that will provide you the opportunity to grow them over time. All right, so in the spirit of practicing, I'm now going to share a few storytelling techniques with you and put myself on the spot with sharing my own story. I know some of you might be doing this on your own or with colleagues afterward. So as we walk through this, I'm going to walk through these storytelling techniques high level. Let's go through and start to think about what some of the techniques are that feel really natural to you or ones that you've maybe used in the past. So the first 7 we have are ways of making a primary character the focal point of your story, of your presentation. How are you going to set the stage and root that story in conflict? We all, I think, know the sort of classic story arc. How do we get that audience emotionally involved and invested in the outcome? What are the challenges we could, bring to our audience, or what is the twist we can have? And then are there any metaphors or other anchors in the audience's mind that we can push? Also thinking about, how we can cut out the unimportant. I will tell you honestly, I'm still focusing on this, struggling with this one myself. We know using things like sound effects and silence can be really effective for allowing the brain to reset and sort of remember what people are talking through. And then sharing personal or vulnerable experiences, thinking about what that pace is, and finding ways to make it memorable and end with a bang. All right, well, with that, I am going to share a quick example as we get into this. So this is a photo of my mom. She's always had a love for gardens and plants, trees in particular, and we grew up in a big forest in northern Wisconsin. So we had a lot of trees and we take a lot of frequent walks to explore. So one summer afternoon when I was about 9, my mother and brother and I were in the trees near our home and we smelled smoke. We knew it was too soon for burning leaves. It was too early in the day for folks to be in their fire pits. And many might not have given it a second thought, but in our rural Wisconsin community, there was this mentality that, you smell smoke, you just got to go check it out. So we picked up the pace and used our noses to sort of guide us on where the smell was getting stronger and deeper into the trees. And as we got closer and the smell was getting stronger, I heard a snap and a pop and just saw my mom sprint ahead. And she ran up to an area around the power lines that cut through the forest. A brush fire. A small one, but it was starting to grow. My mom had already taken off the hoodie that was tied around her waist, and she yelled to my brothers to go run and grab my dad and a neighbor who were working in a shed nearby. And while she started swatting out the fire, she was yelling, "Not my house, not my house, not my house." I asked her what I could do, and she had me stomping and kicking dirt to help put out the smaller fires that had started around this larger blaze. And thankfully, really quickly, my dad and the neighbor and the brothers showed up, and we were able to completely extinguish the fire that had started. Soon after that, more neighbors arrived, including a few who were volunteer firefighters, and they were looking at the damage. And what we noticed was that a tall but thin tree had fallen down onto the power lines, which looked like what had probably caused the spark to start the fire. I have to tell you, my heart still races to this day, thinking about how close we might have been to having a wildfire in our midst. And I think about this experience whenever we're discussing mitigation actions around wildfires. And just that idea, where you smell smoke, there could definitely be a fire. All right. So I'd love for you all to think, when I just told that brief story there, what were some of the storytelling techniques that you saw? And maybe you can share a couple of those, in the chat with what we're doing. So thinking about that, are there any tools or techniques that you might want to apply to your own story? Let's think back to that topic that you were putting a few bullets behind earlier. So how would you write or tell it differently? What could you add to that story? What might you think of? So I'm going to give you another 2 minutes here to just sort of annotate that and think back. And maybe what I'll do is I'll go back to this storytelling technique slide here and just see if there are any of these techniques that you could deploy in your own story. So I will just give you another minute and a half to take a few of those notes. And just so you know, folks in the live session are actually partnering up at this point and are sharing these 2-minute stories with a partner. So I will just give you another couple of seconds here, and maybe you're identifying some of these storytelling techniques you'd love to do more of, or you'd love to engage in further, or you'd love to see in more of the work that you're pulling together. All right, just another few seconds. Right. Well, hopefully you have some great examples there. And so now we want to pose, what changed? When you think about how you were approaching the story the second time around, what were you able to apply? Are there certain areas you'd like to focus on? And so what I'd love for you to do moving forward, and this is a little bit of a commitment we're making to ourselves as part of this session, at the end of ASFPM here, what is one strength you want to use more moving forward? Or what is one area over the next 3 months that you would like to focus on? And then, are there any of these storytelling techniques or sort of areas that we spoke about today that excites you? What is that plan for after today? Right. So I know that we're ending a little bit early because we wanted to leave room for questions. And what I'll say is we're going to have the live session happening at the same time. And as soon as the live session moves over to Q&A, they will welcome us into that session. If for some reason you need to take off or other things, you've got questions that pop up or questions that we don't get to in the live session, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to connect. Could also connect via LinkedIn. So whatever is helpful for you on your storytelling journeys. So thank you for your time today. And I look forward to, maybe hearing some of your questions in the live session. And if not, maybe hearing from you again in the future. Happy storytelling.